Hold on. Let's see here. Hello, everyone. This is Rob Orson with the Emerging Revolutionary War. Happy to be here tonight with author and historian Tim Rose, who has authored a book that Mark and I are very much interested in, George Washington and Alexandria, a founding friendship. And this book is something I think is highly needed for anyone that is interested in George Washington to as Mark likes to argue, Alexandria is George Washington's hometown. So, Tim, thank you for being here tonight, not shoveling snow here on the East Coast. I know you're not too far from us here in Virginia, so I'm sure you're dealing with the same weather we are. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Mark has like a ton of questions, I bet. But I'll just start off really quick, just kind of introduce you to everyone watching. So tell us how you got into this. So that's what we always ask our people we bring on to our live podcast is like, what drew you to this topic, George Washington, Alexandria?
Okay, that's a great place to start, and I'll give you just a little bit of my background. I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia. So growing up in Virginia, you got George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, colonial history abounds, Revolutionary War history. So like so many good Virginians, you grow up with it all around you. I would say though, my professionally, I was in the Marine Corps, served for 8 years active duty, 2.5 years in the reserves. And that was probably the first time being in the Marine Corps that I really got well, I'll just say it, the true George Washington bug as far as wanting to learn a lot more about him. And it really had to do with the fact that I got a sense of his leadership, in some ways his humanity. I think, as Virginians, as Americans, we do think of Washington almost as this person on a pedestal that's almost godlike in some ways, and we lose the sense of, hey, he was also a man, and he was a man and a leader, and he struggled with a lot of issues that we all struggle with. And specifically, as I thought about myself as a Marine Corps officer, day-to-day life in the Marine Corps involves all things just kind of admin logistics, discipline issues. There's a lot of hurry up and wait. And when I read the book 1776 by David McCullough, I realized George Washington was struggling with a lot of similar issues, training, discipline, just a lot of the day-to-day drudgery of trying to be a leader, but not just like the leader that actually crosses the Delaware River. That's probably a small component of any action is the actual the battle itself. It's all the stuff that goes behind it. So just to wrap that up, I just think that that's what really got me interested specifically in George Washington. And then when I moved to Alexandria with my wife in 2021, I started walking around this beautiful part of town called Old Town Alexandria. And there's a whole number of plaques, historic markers, homes that all mention George Washington. And I had an idea, obviously, Alexandria being about 8.5 miles from Mount Vernon, that there probably is a connection there. I think everyone maybe kind of can grasp that intuitively, but it's not until you actually walk around Alexandria, you start looking at the plaques, the homes, and then you start to realize, wow, there's something deeper here. And so I did a lot of research, a lot of studying, a lot of late nights in the Alexandria Barrett Branch Library, their special
Yep.
collections. And before you know it, I really realized there's a big story here, a really strong and powerful story. So that is, I'll just stop there to give you a sense of how I got into this topic specifically.
And I just want to thank you, Tim, for coming on here, and thank you for doing this. Yeah, the book is George Washington and Alexandria, a founding friendship, and everything you just said. Being somebody who grew up in Fairfax County, I first got into history and George Washington by going to places like Mount Vernon, and it's only later that a similar kind of epiphany happened when you realize, hey, this town is just a few miles away, and this is where he's going to church. This is where he's conducting business. This is where he's meeting with friends. This is where he's dining. This is where he's doing so much stuff. Yeah, no, and there's not a real dense literature focused on that, and so that's where I think that this book is really going to help kind of illuminate that for a lot of folks who might not be aware of all of Washington's historic associations with Alexandria. So thank you for putting this together in a book. And it's great. It's a history press book. It's got and I love that you mentioned the importance of these plaques and markers to knowing the significance of the places you're walking by. And there's a lot of good images of those plaques and markers so that people so that you can go down there and learn about those associations. But yeah, no, that's really really fascinating. Now, one question I got for you, it's in one of the very first sentences in the book you talk about this is George Washington's hometown. Now living just across the river from Fredericksburg, Virginia. I know some of our viewers may have a bone to pick with you and say that Fredericksburg is his actual hometown. So, where do you come down on being able to make such a strong statement that Alexandria is Washington's hometown?
That's great. Yeah, I never forget. I went to the Mary Ball Washington house,
Hmm.
and they said, where are you visiting from?" I said, "Alexandria, George Washington's hometown." And I got the predictable looks, and you know, people saying, we're going to correct you there first 2 minutes I walk in." Um, well, here's the thing. There's so many cities and towns in the country that want to put a claim on George Washington. So, far be it for me to be the first one to try to do that. It's the old saw of George Washington slept here. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there must be tons of places. Now, Fredericksburg, and I'm not going to take anything away from Washington's connections to Fredericksburg by any means. I would love to read a book about George Washington's, what I would say, boyhood home, and about the fact that from 1738, when he's 6 years old, pretty much up until the age of 16, 17, by 1748, when he goes off and really begins his professional career. That's where Washington's spending a lot of his boyhood at Ferry Farm. His mother is raising him, father who ends up dying when he's only 11. Washington's boyhood, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot written about it. I mean, there's obviously information on it. Once you get into age 16, I mean, that's when Alexandria is being created. It's coming into fruition through the work of his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. So George and Lawrence share the same father, Augustine. And so, Fredericksburg is established before Alexandria. Alexandria is not formally established until George Washington is 17 years old. So in some ways, a town like Fredericksburg, being his boyhood home, has a leg up on Washington. But I really think the key here is, well, let me just mention the hometown part. Okay, so some of it is just a product of geography. Okay, where Mount Vernon is located, Alexandria is the closest town, now city, originally was a town. And so the fact that Lawrence, who was living at what was, what Mount Vernon, creates this town, Alexandria, that is because he's trying to create a town that is going to be tied into what the principal cash crop is at Mount Vernon, which is tobacco. So all of that ties into one another. And so just as a matter of geography, it's really not an absurd claim. It's actually the most valid claim. Now, the part that I do want to emphasize specifically is the subtitle, A Founding Friendship, because it is these deep friendships, it's these familial ties that Washington has, and then all of these people that are just so close to him from the moment of his early years, his early teenage years, up until literally the last day of his life. And I can get into some more of that. I love talking about it. I mean, I just think it's an incredible story. And so it's not even just Alexandria. It's also the friendship component too that I think is so so important.
And that's a good segue into, I was going to ask you the title of the book, that Founding Friendships. What made you pick that title? Maybe talk about some of the friends that Washington makes that are prominent people in Alexandria. I'm assuming that's where some of the inspiration for the title comes from.
Yes, well, I could start with the founders of Alexandria. So which I've already alluded to. Lawrence Washington
Right.
is the best example. But within that, and this is a story I love, and frankly, if I'm going to write a follow-up book to this, it would be something like George Washington and the Fairfaxes, because now we'll talk about some other people that are very tied into both the creation of Alexandria and really, for lack of a better term, I mean, the coming of age or the creation of George Washington. And so if you think about Colonel William Fairfax, he is one of the founders of Alexandria alongside his son-in-law, Lawrence Washington. So Lawrence, just to give all the listeners the backstory here, Lawrence, he returns from the Cartagena campaign. So he is a military officer who served in the British Navy. I actually think he's considered a Marine. He's a soldier. He's a captain in the regiment that was raised in Virginia specifically to serve in a war called the War of Jenkins' Ear. That was 1741 to 42, if memory serves correct. And he serves under Admiral Edward Vernon. When he finishes his service, he will inherit the property known as Little Hunting Creek Plantation, and he'll rename that property after Admiral Vernon. That's what we know today as Mount Vernon.
Mhm.
Uh, Simultaneously, he also is neighbors now with Belvoir Plantation, which is south of Mount Vernon. It's divided by Doe Run, which is a creek. You can still go by it. You see where George Washington's grist mill and distillery were built there. And of course, at Belvoir are the Fairfaxes, including Colonel William Fairfax, who is representing his cousin, Lord Fairfax. He's basically his cousin's land agent. His cousin, Lord Fairfax, has a whopping 5.2 million acres, which comprises roughly 20% of Virginia's landmass. Colonel William Fairfax has many daughters. Two of them, well, one of them, Anne Fairfax, marries Lawrence. And then the other, Sarah, actually marries John Carlisle in 1747, who is a very prominent Alexandrian. Now, saying all this, just so you know, where I'm going with this is that this is what brings George into the orbit of the Fairfaxes. All right. And specifically, Colonel William Fairfax, who becomes like a father figure to George Washington and helps George Washington get a start as a surveyor, because Washington's first surveys begin in 1748 when he's 16 years old. Not officially yet. He will get his commission, his license, if you will, 1 year later, but he goes on his first major survey of the Fairfax land in 1748, and he wouldn't be doing that were it not for his connections to the Fairfaxes. Now, Colonel William Fairfax is a trustee of Alexandria. He's one of the original landholders in Alexandria, and he's also serving on the King's Council. So he is basically number two in terms of political figures in Virginia behind the governor. So he is extremely important to getting Washington started both professionally and then several years later militarily. So both are key components of what is going to transform George Washington into this very formidable figure by the time he's in his early 20s and really now serving in the French and Indian War. I've probably gotten a little bit ahead of maybe where the question was, but I really wanted
No,
to
it's great.
provide the backstory there and get into. So let me wrap up by saying, just know when you talk about Lawrence Washington and the Fairfaxes, they're both involved in the creation of Alexandria, and that's happening simultaneously. This is what's really cool, is that's happening simultaneously with the coming of age of George Washington at age 16 and then 17 years old when he becomes the official surveyor.
I was gonna say, this is, I mean, it's an amazing the timing of this, that right at this time where Washington is attempting to get a profession, get involved in society. I mean, and the Fairfaxes are, yeah, always highlighted as being really important in that. And that's also a really neat site. Nobody's ever been there. If you go to Fort Belvoir, on the base are the ruins of the old Belvoir Manor, which is pretty neat because that was a place too where he's getting introduced to the society. But the fact that he's this age doing this, and that's right at the same time that this town is being formed on the
Hmm.
Potomac, it's like, you know, right at the right time at the right place. And
It,
you know, you mentioned surveying being really important. Now you have this map up here. You know, there's
yes.
is this map that Washington has drawn. Did he like survey the streets, or was he just taking? Was he just training, or I guess
Yeah.
you know, it's almost like he laid out some of the very streets of the actual town. So
Exactly. Yeah. So it's actually really important because historically, the way people have tried to categorize the Washington surveys, he does draw two important survey maps of Alexandria. One is very rudimentary. It's in 1748. It's very crude drawing. And the other one that's on the cover that's very significant is the one from 1749, which shows the 84 half-acre lots. It's got the listed names,
Mhm.
how much each person bought the individual lots for. The currency, the mechanism of currency was Spanish pistols. That's not like a pistol gun, but like a basically a hard currency. And Washington, so he was assisting the lead surveyor, John West Jr. So he was not the surveyor, and a lot of people have tried to say, well, Washington surveyed Alexandria. You know,
Right.
if they're not, you know, it's kind of a nice. It's developed into a little bit of the mythology of George Washington, but it's actually better than that. I'll tell you why. Because really, what it shows is it actually shows Alexandria's influence on Washington, whereas people have tried to invert that and make that about Washington's influence on Alexandria. So, for the purposes of what I'm talking about with the book, I actually think it's more beneficial to really see how this is Alexandria in some ways giving George Washington this ability to train, to learn the trade of surveying. And here's the interesting thing with the dates. So Alexandria is officially established July 13th, 1749. So that map obviously predated that, but not by a significant amount. But it's not until July 20th. So it's 1 week later when George Washington gets that formal commission from the College of William and Mary. I know William and Mary people, you know, they want to talk that up, which I'm going to give them credit.
That's
You know,
that's Mark.
hey,
There you go, Mark.
look, running a tour company, I got to be here for everybody. I got to give everybody their due here. So, but yeah, you got William and Mary Commission surveyor, but surveyor of Culpeper County, and so he gets that commission 1 week after Alexandria is actually established. So that is all to say that I think it's really neat to see how Alexandria helps Washington get started in this case.
yeah, I mean, and you meant talking about these families like the Carlyles and the Fairfaxes. I mean, these were the big guys, and Washington was just this teenager. Which
Mhm.
yeah, like you say, it's kind of an inversion of how because you now Washington is so outshines everybody that to imagine this 16-year-old coming up saying hey, can I help you survey this area or draw the map for you. Yeah, it does show you how significant that is to this youth trying to find his way in the world.
Right.
And then
Right.
it is amazing that they just established this town in 1749, and 6 years later you have during the French Indian War the British military there in Alexandria with Braddock and getting ready to
Mhm.
go out to head out to it was ultimately Braddock's defeat.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess how did the French and Indian War play into Alexandria's history with George Washington.
Okay, I love that. You're how much time do we have? Okay, this is
We
great.
usually go
So
about an hour, but you just roll on. Don't worry about it. No, you go on.
look, look, look. This so in some ways, I know you guys are emerging Revolutionary War. Obviously, you can't talk about the Revolutionary War without talking about the French and Indian War. Sometimes I have a hard time because I love French and Indian War history. Uh, I love the fact that, I mean, some of it is, it's all like this true wilderness fighting. I mean,
Yep.
Washington's service in the Revolutionary War, I love, it's great. Sometimes I like reading more about his service in the French and Indian War. I'm not going to lie. I think things like the Braddock campaign, I think the whole campaign, he went out to Fort Necessity. And I can get into that because what Alexandria is playing right now for all this, it's I'm gonna use some specific military um, terminology because background is in the Marine Corps. I would consider it like the assembly area. That's a tactical term that we use in the Marine Corps. Maybe other branches use that. Uh, Williamsburg's the capital. It's sort of like the home base. Alexandria is this assembly area. It's not in danger during any of these conflicts. I mean, there's no imminent threat, but it is where the following things are going to happen. Washington is going to be doing his recruiting. He's going to be doing his training, disciplining, raising his forces, and then ultimately trying to get them supplied. Now, I mentioned John Carlisle, then you brought his name up. 1754, when George Washington gets his commission by Governor Dinwiddie, or he gets his promotion to lieutenant colonel, John Carlisle is also promoted. He becomes the head of the Virginia Commissary. Now, running a tour company and trying to bring everything into sort of modern terminology so people can understand these types of things. Let's just say that John Carlisle is taking his skills as a merchant and he's turning that basically into being one of the first American military contractors. So he is being contracted specifically to get food, to get supplies, to get equipment for Washington and the Virginia Regiment. So Washington is going to do this really interesting thing, starting with, if I can backtrack just 1 second, 1753, when he gets his first assignment, his first mission to go out to the Western Pennsylvania and to try to deliver which he does, he delivers a letter from Governor Dinwiddie to the French forces that are out in coming down from what's Erie, Pennsylvania, specifically making his way to a place called Fort Le Boeuf. Washington's letter is to tell the French, very politely, vacate this land that is claimed by the British, known as the Ohio Country. So what is the French and Indian War ultimately going to be about in terms of the beginning of it? It's France laying claim to what they call New France, the Ohio River Valley, trying to take control of the Ohio River, going all the way down towards the Mississippi River, and trying to unite with other territory that they claim down in New Orleans. And for the British, there's a company that started called the Ohio Company. And interestingly enough, Governor Dinwiddie is one of the investors in the company. I believe he might even be a director of the company. He has a position of leadership. Lawrence Washington's involved in the company. George Mason's involved in the company, which, by the way, George Mason's another Alexandria trustee. I can get into that some more. But Washington is sent on this mission by Governor Dinwiddie to go out and tell the French to leave. So the French, they say, no, we're not going anywhere. Washington returns, and he returns in 1754. And that's when he gets the follow-on mission to go out to back out to the Ohio Country, and this time to use force if necessary. He actually has very specific instructions by Dinwiddie that if needed, he can actually attack the French. Now, where does Alexander fit into all this? Each time he goes out there and then he returns, he's always coming in and out of Alexandria. Okay, so it's always a place where he's going to refit, whether it's his regiment, he's going to resupply, he's going to recruit, he's going to be training soldiers there. And so it really serves as this home base throughout the French and Indian War. Now, I haven't even brought up the following year, so the Braddock campaign. The Braddock campaign will be staged in Alexandria. That is truly used as an assembly area. Braddock arrives in Alexandria in March of 1755, and from there, he is going to make plans to depart Alexandria the following month. There's a really strong example of colonial cooperation, I guess, if you will. He has a meeting in Alexandria, Braddock does, in April 1755. He brings 5 royal governors from Virginia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania. They all come to Alexandria. They're there to talk about the strategy behind Braddock's campaign, and they also talk about the financing behind Braddock's campaign. Wars are very expensive. This one was absolutely no exception. The governors talked to Braddock about the reluctance of their colonists, the colonies that they represent, to actually finance and provide money for him to get the supplies, the wagons that he needs. And so this does spur a conversation about taxation. As I always like to ask my guests, well, not specifically taxation from the colonies, taxation by Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So as I like to ask people that come on tours with me, how much representation do the colonists have in Parliament at this time? That would be a big goose egg. How much representation will they have 10 years later when the Stamp Act is passed? Still a big goose egg. And then how about 10 more years later when the Revolutionary War officially kicks off in 1775? Still no representation. So what's really cool about the Braddock campaign and about the meeting in Alexandria is it's one of the first times you have this true high-level conference, 5 governors, Major General Edward Braddock coming together, and the conversations that they discuss are taxation, but without representation, because of course they're talking about Parliament being the lever behind which the colonists are going to have their hands forced. So I really think that makes Alexandria a strong place where if you're trying to look at the seeds or trying to get an understanding of where the seeds of the American Revolution began, look no further than the Carlisle House right in the heart of Old Town Alexandria. So let me stop there because I've thrown a lot at you right now. And
No, Carlisle House is a great site. It's one of my favorite sites, and to think about, it's forgotten about the French Indian War connection so much about what starts there. Braddock, as you mentioned, Braddock's route. I've driven the whole route, which is a great
oh,
drive all the way out to just east of Pittsburgh. So talk about Washington's military involvement in his early life in Alexandria. Talk about a little bit about what leadership positions he had politically throughout his life there in town. The churches he serves on and some of the positions. I know a lot more Fairfax based, but
mhm.
Alexandria was the county seat for Fairfax, so he's going to be there serving in those roles. Talk a little bit about his political influences.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's actually really important. The fact that Alexandria does become the county seat of Fairfax County in 1752. And so the reason that's important is because that's where the courthouse is now going to be built in Alexandria. So what is now Alexandria City Hall was at one point in time, the buildings that were the courthouse are now long gone because of a very destructive fire in 1871. Um, that will be important for Washington because he does serve as a Fairfax County Justice of the Peace. So one of the things that brings him into Alexandria on many occasions, I was going through his diaries and Founders Online, and there is a period right up until the Revolutionary War begins where it looks like you could say every month, if not every month and a half, he's probably coming into Alexandria specifically to serve as Justice of the Peace. And in fact, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it might have had something to do with courts meeting on a regular basis, but I could be off on that. Either way, the point is that Washington is serving in this role, and it's bringing him to Alexandria quite a bit. So that's an important political. I mean, it's a very high position for him to hold to have. When he does end up buying 2 lots in Alexandria, In 1763, when the town expands, he is actually going to become a Alexandria trustee, so a town trustee. Now, the town trustees, I always say, it's like a glorified homeowners association. So, these are landowners. They've got, some of the original lots that are sold, and they basically are property holders that are making the laws. It's not a democratic system as we recognize it. It wouldn't actually be until 1779 that you have the transition from Alexandria being a town to being a city with more of a democratic elected council and mayor, that looks more reminiscent to what we have today. But the fact that Washington's a town trustee, I mean, he is serving essentially on Alexandria's town governance. Then getting into his real true political experience as we know it in terms of being a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. So again, to spread the love around to all these different places that claim connections to Washington, I think maybe Winchester, Virginia would enter the mix here because the county that he's first going to serve on as a Burgess is Frederick County, 1758. Now, he will run for the poll of Fairfax County in 1765. And I do get into who he replaces in the book. It's a really good example of a man that George Washington knew as his lawyer. So a man named George Johnston. He's got a house plaque on his house in town in Alexandria. I like to go by there. It's one of those plaques that really got me interested in learning more about these connections. But George Johnston does get sick in 1765. He ultimately dies the following year. But George Washington replaces him, and he becomes a Burgess representing Fairfax County in 1765, and he holds that for the next decade up until the beginning of the Revolutionary War, which, by the way, is something his brother had done. So his brother, he's now following in the footsteps of Lawrence, who was representing Fairfax County in the Virginia House of Burgesses. And so that's an important connection because that is now, I mean, that's actually Washington representing Alexandria because Alexandria is part of Fairfax County. So his constituents are all people from Alexandria and as well as the broader county. Then let me just mention the church because you had brought up the church connection. Okay, so I wish I could say Washington was on the vestry of Christ Church in Alexandria. He was elected to the vestry of Christ Church, but he did not. He served on the vestry of Pohick Church, which is of Truro Parish, which is where Pohick Church. That's down in Lorton, Virginia. So it's about 20 miles south of Alexandria. If you're looking to do a trip here, you go from Alexandria, then you could go to Mount Vernon, and then if you want to go by Pohick Church, go there on your way to see George Mason's property of Gunston Hall, and highly recommend doing that. So Washington does serve as a vestryman of Truro Parish, but he is elected to the vestry of Christ Church, and even though he doesn't serve on the vestry of Christ Church, he does help finance the construction of the new church sanctuary that stands to this day by purchasing one of the original box pews inside the church. So when the church was built, they broke ground on a new church sanctuary in 1767. The actual parish, Fairfax Parish, was established 2 years prior to that. It would be a 6-year period of time that it took to actually build the church sanctuary in Alexandria. And there was 2 builders. The first one is a man named James Parsons. He left the church incomplete in 1772. Well, they had to finish the church. They contracted a second builder, a man who we've already been talking about, John Carlisle. They paid Carlisle 220 pounds for his work. And in order to raise that money, they sold 10 of the 32 original box pews. I want everybody to think it's in a box shape. It's your family pew. 10 of them were sold, so 10 of them were owned. And George Washington, in February of 1773, bought pew number 5 for the price of 36 pounds, 10 shillings. And that pew is still standing in Christ Church to this day. So that is an example of Washington's influence, the fact that he owns one of these box pews, and he is supporting the establishment of the new church sanctuary, which shows his support for religious institutions. In this case, the established religious institution, because keep in mind this is prior to the Revolutionary War. So what is Christ Church? That is, it's to this day it's an Episcopalian church. Originally, it was part of the Church of England.
That's great. And there's always lots of questions about, is Washington attending church at Pohick? Is he attending church at Christ Church? There's here locally, there's a big debate about that. But I like the story about Pohick being between Mason and Washington, so they both could get there
Mm.
in equidistant. And
Yeah.
you could do a whole book about Mason and Washington's relationship. That's a different conversation.
Oh
Goes
yeah.
up, goes way down.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
um, since you do tours of Old Town, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit, I'm going to kind of focus in on some of the sites here in Alexandria I'm not going to ask you to pick your favorite site, but I'm going to ask you to pick your favorite site. Give me some of your favorite sites there in town that are still standing. I'm sure Mark knows most of these, but a lot of our viewers might not know them, and I think it's worthwhile talking about because what we try to do, Merging Reservoir, is bring people to these sites, and I think you're a great gateway into doing that. So talk about some of the sites that are still standing in Alexandria that have these Washington connections.
Great question. And you're right, it's hard to pick. I can give a lot of them, but I'll just pick up on where I left off with Christ Church, because Christ Church is an amazing place to see. This is where Washington attended services in this sanctuary in the lead up to the American Revolution, all the way up until the last recorded church service of his life, November 17th, 1799.
Hmm.
If he went to another service, if he went somewhere else, I haven't seen a record of it. If someone sees something, if he went to Pohick, let me know. I'll tell you my source. It's pretty simple. Founders Online.
Mhm.
Founders Online does there's almost 31,000 of Washington's writings are documented there. They've been digitized. It's an effort, I think, going back to the 1970s by the University of Virginia. So I haven't seen there another record of Washington going to church after that November 17th, 1799. So that is a place that I love going to. In fact, Christ Church is probably where I've had the first little spark of I might want to do tours in Alexandria. Pretty early on when I moved to Alexandria, I actually just walked by there and I was like, I had this idea. It just kind of came to me that this might be a fun place to take people on tours. And but then my second thought is, well, I gotta dive more into this history and learn a lot more about this place first. So, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that. Not only am I doing tours, but I am also one of the volunteer docents at Christ Church. So I do
Mhm.
help the church and assist them with a lot of the history of the church. Even though I am personally a Presbyterian, so I don't go to the Episcopal Church. I go to Presbyterian Church. But I'm very much involved in the history there. So Christ Church is a big one. Trying to think, just again, top of mind because of where the conversation has been. The Carlisle House is another big one. I take people by there on tours, and then there's tours you can do at the inside of the house. And of course, I'm not I'm not the type of person that says, "Oh, do my tour and you don't have to go there." Nope, I play well with everybody. Say, take a tour with me, and then if you want to dive deeper into the Carlisle House, I highly encourage you to do just that. And now, Rob, I'll bring it up. I believe you had told me you have a connection to Gatsby's Tavern.
Oh yes, yep,
So,
great spot.
um, I actually am currently training a gentleman who's interested in becoming a guide with me. But right now, he's actually doing tours at Gatsby's Tavern. And so the last place I went earlier this week was to shadow one of his tours at Gatsby's Tavern, and he did a great job. And so that's another spot I love. Amazing, tons of Washington connections there at Gadsby's Tavern. Let me give you maybe just a kind of hidden history, if you will.
Great.
Duval's Tavern,
Hmm.
which is not very well known, although there is a plaque on the building itself. And the gentleman who owns it did put a statue of George Washington, and it looks kind of a younger looking Washington out in front. So it has that, it definitely projects that historic aura, between the plaque, the fact that it's looks like an old tavern, which it is, and then the statue there. But there's an incredible history at Duval's Tavern, both as a tavern and then even up until the 1790s when it became the Bank of Alexandria, which gets into another facet of Washington's life that I love, his connections to the Bank of Alexandria as a financial institution. But Duval's Tavern, let me just mention kind of right off the bat, that is actually where George Washington came and celebrated New Year's Eve, 1783, at Duval's Tavern. He was feted there by the citizens of Alexandria. It's kind of a fancy way of saying he was honored there. They threw him a party. For really going to use just kind of plain speak here, look, they had a big shindig. They had a big party there. What I love about that, so notice the date, December 31st, 1783. The Revolutionary War began 1775. George Washington was selected commander-in-chief on June 15th, one day after the army was formally established. 8.5 years he serves until he resigns his commission, December 23rd, 1783, in Annapolis, Maryland. So 8 days later, now that he's back to his private life, he's no longer wearing the uniform. He's no longer serving as commander-in-chief. He is making what, again, appears to be one of his first public appearances now that he's returned to his private life after resigning his commission. So if it's not the first, if there was another public appearance, it's actually his first sort of big celebration, now returning to private life and doing something what's really great is the 1783 post-Revolutionary War period, going to build this country. I mean, it's time to get to work. The revolution, we've got our independence. All right, what's coming next? And Washington is involved in a number of projects in Alexandria, specifically with the mission of doing just that. And I can talk about those, or let me just stop there because I want to encourage any follow-on questions from what I've said.
Yeah, before we get, I mean, just because you talked about kind of the beginning and the ending of the Revolutionary War, can you talk a little bit about the Revolutionary War? Some of the people from Alexandria. I specifically am interested. One of my personal
Here we go.
Let's do it. I know
one of my personal heroes, and I know some other folks I know in Alexandria too is Colonel John Fitzgerald. And I know he's pops up in your book a few times. So if you could give us a little background on Fitzgerald, and then also just any other specific to that. I know there's a lot of guys who form up and are drilling at the market square and go off to fight all across the country. So any stories, related to the war in particular, and if you could also touch on, did the British ever actually attempt to attack or capture Alexandria?
You got close, but that's actually a Fitzgerald story. So that is Fitzgerald basically mobilizing the militia and presenting a show of force when there was a threat of some British ships coming and attacking Alexandria. And Fitzgerald had a lot to do with the defenses to prevent that from happening. So that is actually one of Alexandria's stories as far as Revolutionary War history, and a lot of that was tied into the fact that Alexandria becomes one of the critical supply depots as the war is shifting to the south. Now Alexandria really reprises that role of being a center of logistics, medical care, which it's had, frankly, in going back to the French and Indian War, and then all the way up until the Civil War, and then even beyond. In fact, some ways, not to get too ahead of the questions, but even in the 20th century, you think about military infrastructure that's been created specifically in Alexandria. The thing that sticks out is the torpedo factory, which is now an art center in the heart of Old Town. Okay, but going back to Fitzgerald and the connections. So there's a really good book on Washington's aides de camp, and the name is escaping me right now. But if you look up book on Washington's aides de camp, I'm sure you'll find it. And that book details the 32 aides de camp that served with Washington throughout his 8.5 years in the Revolutionary War. The most famous one, as I always tell people, is the guy from New York who's got the musical named after him, the Colonel Hamilton. But what's really neat is that 3 of Washington's aides de camp were from Alexandria. So that includes John Fitzgerald, it includes Robert Harrison, and then it includes Harrison's brother-in-law, George Johnston Jr. And if you recall, I had mentioned George Johnston, who George Washington replaced in the Virginia House of Burgesses. Well, George Johnston Jr., surprise, surprise, is his son. So unfortunately, he dies. He doesn't serve too long. He does die I believe it was 1777. I'd have to get the date correct on that. But basically, he dies fairly early on in the war, and he doesn't have a very lengthy period of service relative to the other aides de camp, including Harrison, Harrison was a aide de camp for a brief period, but more importantly, he then becomes Washington's military secretary for about 6 years until 1781. This reprises a very almost a traditional Alexandria role for George Washington, because during the French and Indian War, George Washington also had an aide turned military secretary, a man named John Kirkpatrick. So think about this. Both the Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, when Washington is colonel of the Virginia Regiment, he has an Alexandria secretary. And then during the Revolutionary War for 6 years, Washington has an Alexandria secretary, which is really important to know. Just this is an important position, and I know you might be thinking of like, oh, okay, what's the big deal? I can tell you as a military officer, anyone who's been in the military and been in a position of leadership or even lower ranks, frankly, I mean, communications is like the bane of everybody's existence. Now we have radios and they never work, of course. And but back then, what were people doing? It was just volumes of written letters. And then you would dispatch your aides, you would dispatch couriers to go deliver letters to your subordinate commanders or to people throughout the battle space. So what these aides are doing and what the secretary is doing is really important, and it's important to manage for Washington to have this military family, this staff to manage what he is doing on a day-to-day basis. Let me just mention with Fitzgerald, because a lot of people are familiar now with this with the Ken Burns documentary that's come out. I don't think that Ken Burns mentioned Fitzgerald by name in the documentary, but he did reference the aide. Okay, this is actually one of those stories. It's not quite a crossing of the Delaware story, but Fitzgerald was there for the crossing of the Delaware. I do mention that in my book, a quote that he had. But this story is up there. So it's the story at the Battle of Princeton, when Washington is leading this counterattack, and he's basically riding on his white charger, and he pushes forward. I mean, he's leading from the front, and there's this big plume of smoke, the British fire, and the smoke goes up, it billows all around him. And the story is of one of Washington's aides who covers his eyes because he's afraid that Washington has been shot and he's going to see the smoke clear and he's going to see a dead General Washington laying on the ground. Well, the smoke clears, the aide uncovers his eyes, and he sees George Washington still riding on his horse, leading his troops into battle. I believe the quote that he then comes back and says to his aide is, well, he says something along the lines of, "It's a fine fox chase, my boys." And then he continues to lead them on. That aide is Colonel John Fitzgerald. So again, that story is mentioned in the documentary. It says that an aide covered his eyes. Well, that aide is John Fitzgerald from Alexandria. And there's a lot of places in Alexandria that you can see that are affiliated with with Fitzgerald. I'll give you two of them. One of them is a historic warehouse down by the waterfront. There's a gift shop that's there now called the Old Town Shop. And up until like 2 months ago, there was a Starbucks that was in that shop. So I used to call it the most historic Starbucks in America. Now I got to see what goes in there next. But that warehouse was constructed sometime around 1795 when Fitzgerald owned the property and had that warehouse built when he was doing his work as a merchant in Alexandria up until the end of his life. And he did die 12 days before George Washington. So he actually died on December 2nd of 1799. And then the second place that you can see, probably more significant than just a warehouse, although the warehouse is cool to see, but is the oldest Catholic parish in Virginia. The Basilica of St. Mary became a minor basilica in 2017. The church is now, well, up in 2025. It was easy to say it's 230 years old. But I got 231 years old now in 2026. So Fitzgerald was not a priest. He was a layman, but he did raise the money to help establish what became the first Catholic parish in Virginia. It took him a number of years to do that. There is a great story of George Washington and Fitzgerald having dinner together on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1788. And the following day, George Washington donating a small amount of money. He wasn't a big financier, but he's donating a small amount of money specifically to help Fitzgerald establish the church, which he ends up accomplishing 7 years later. What an amazing example of Washington supporting a friend, former aide-de-camp, John Fitzgerald, and George Washington was not a Catholic. He was at this point Episcopalian. Catholics not always been treated too well in American history, and there's definitely been some discrimination. So this is a great example of him showing his support of other religious denominations. And it's just an amazing, it's a humanizing story. I mean, think about it. They're having dinner, and the next day he's making this donation. I mean, what can you imagine what was discussed at that dinner? Fitzgerald saying, "Hey, we don't have a large Catholic population, but we've got people like myself that want to worship. We want to have a church here." And Washington turning around and then making a donation. I mean, look, I know Washington is considered one of the wealthiest of the founding fathers, but you know what? He always felt a little bit land rich, cash poor. So, like, he's very wealthy in terms of assets, but the cash flow wasn't always there. And actually, that's a whole nother part of Washington's life that I like to talk about. So, for him to make that donation is a big deal.
I think the bigger deal is, real quick, Mark, the bigger deal is Fitzgerald
Do you want
chose.
me to mention anything else about? Am I frozen?
No, you're good. You're good. Sorry, we froze for a second. Probably something to do with
Okay.
the ice. Um,
Uh,
I think real quick, I think the bigger deal is that Washington chose to hang out with Fitzgerald on St. Patrick's Day. Like,
yeah.
or actually vice
Yeah.
versa, right? Like the Irish man decided to hang out with Washington on St. Patrick's Day. So
Yeah.
just kind of
Hey, so
Well,
so go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and this kind of brings this discussion full circle too, is
Mhm.
And just want to give a shout out to some of my friends in the ancient order of Hibernians up there in Alexandria, including Terry Riley. They were just successful in last month of actually putting up a new plaque at St. Mary's that actually has an image of that exact dinner happening with Washington giving a donation with a little explanation. And so when we started off the conversation, he talked about how
Oh boy.
you would go down these streets and learn this history from plaques and markers. That's still happening, and there are more markers being put up. And I
Mhm.
just think it's great that they're able to help tell that particular story, so that who knows, 30 years from now, some kid's going to be walking by there, see that, read that, and that's how that history continues to live on down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I was so happy when they put that in because it gives me something to,
Yeah.
it gives me a nice visual. I can say, hey, look, um, here you can see it. Don't take my word for it. There's a plaque here.
Hey, we've done that too. As we're getting close to an hour here, let's talk a little bit about post-war, post-Revolutionary War Washington, presidential and post-presidential Washington, because he's constantly trying to help encourage Alexandria's economy. He's trying to, obviously locate the capital somewhere near Alexandria. And he's got the canal business he's running. So talk a little bit about briefly about some of those post-war things that Washington's doing to try to help Alexandria out. And it really shows that connection he has with the town.
Okay, yeah. So, and the key word you said there was brief. So
Well,
I know.
no, take your time. I didn't mean that as
No, no,
a
I know, but okay. So I'm gonna try to I will try to make this very concise, but let's start with the big venture that he starts, and he actually does start it in Alexandria in the sense that he's having some of the original meetings in Alexandria at a tavern called Lomax Tavern, which no longer exists, unfortunately. But it's the Potomac Company or Potawatomi Company. It's the attempt to build the canals to bypass the falls of the Potomac. Now, this all has to do with why Alexandria is exactly where it is. It's right below the fall line of the Potomac River. If you continue going further west upriver, you're going to hit a series of waterfalls. It's very hard to get ships past there. So, what is the objective of the Potomac Company? It's really to turn the Potomac River into a major basically a water-based highway to facilitate trade between the interior of the United States all the way out. Again, noticing a through line here out into the Ohio River Valley back to the eastern part of the United States. Now, where the Potomac Company fails financially, it was never a big financial success. It succeeds politically. So it becomes an important political step towards a series of meetings that will take place starting in Alexandria and then at Mount Vernon, what's known as the Mount Vernon Compact. Uh, what is it all about? Well, under the Articles of Confederation, each state is like its own country. And it's trying to work out things like riparian rights, as in who has rights to the waterways of the Potomac River, Virginia or Maryland. So there's commissioners that come first to Alexandria in March 1785 to start hashing out and discussing basically a treaty of sorts or a compromise between the two states. That does lead to Washington, who has an interest in this meeting, um, coming to Alexandria, inviting the commissioners to Mount Vernon to bring the discussions, to conclude the discussions there. Now, the Mount Vernon Conference sets the stage for the following year's Annapolis Conference, which not too successful in terms of things being worked out there, but it is successful as a springboard for the following year, 1787, the Philadelphia Convention, or what we know as the Constitutional Convention. So it's basically a series of conferences that are leading to the Constitutional Convention, which going into it, it's basically, hey, we're gonna modify, we're gonna alter the Articles of Confederation, and then no. it gets scrapped pretty quick for we're basically going to really create a whole new form of government under a new constitution. So basically getting into it's that venture that Washington spearheads, the Potomac Company, that then leads to some of the political issues that it entails that are going to set up basically the now creation of the formal government of the United States. Now, with that, Washington is president of the Constitution Convention. But just because they all put their signatures on the Constitution by September of 1787, that doesn't mean the Constitution's adopted. Now it's got to go to the states. You need 9 states to ratify it. So that again gets us into another aspect of Washington's connections to Alexandria, because a lot of Washington's friends from Alexandria were specifically going to represent him in terms of basically projecting his influence down in Richmond in June of 1788 at the ratification convention in Richmond, Virginia. I'll just, in the interest of time, spoiler alert, the Constitution was ratified. Virginia was on the cusp of being the 9th state. New Hampshire beat us to it by a couple days. I can't remember the exact number of days. So Virginia ended up being the 10th state. Nevertheless, still very important. Washington's home state. Can you imagine the egg on his face if
Yeah.
I mean, if his home state of the Constitution that he was just president of that convention did not ratify the Constitution, how embarrassing would that be? And just so people understand, like, this was not a foregone conclusion. I think sometimes we think, oh, wow, this was, oh, yeah, of course, they just ratified it. No. See, there was political interests, people that were close to Washington in their earlier life, the Revolutionary War time, people like Patrick Henry, George Mason, that were now coming out very strongly against the Constitution as it was originally signed from the convention in Philadelphia, and for not bad reasons. I'm gonna be very charitable to some of these people. They had, especially George Mason, had a really strong idea of what the Constitution was lacking. And so now let's get into what it was lacking. Well, as people may or may not know, the first 10 amendments, they're just that. They're amendments to the Constitution. So these are the critical Bill of Rights. And so what was someone like George Mason's principal objection? That the Constitution in its original form lacked a Declaration of Rights. He really wanted that in there. So I know I'm throwing a lot out here. Do you want me to just then dovetail into the, okay, go ahead.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
The presidency?
Yeah.
Okay, so Washington as president, you had alluded to this, Rob, but I think one of the big things that this connection to the Potomac, him seeing the Potomac as this both economic and political unifier, gets into one of the reasons why we have our nation's capital exactly where we have it.
Mm-hmm.
So why is Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, why is it located where it is? Well, there is a compromise, the famous compromise between Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison. But George Washington specifically had a very strong interest in the establishment of D.C., being on the Potomac, not far from Mount Vernon. And what's interesting is that the act that passed, the Residence Act, which Washington signed into law July 16th of 1790, to establish the temporary and then permanent capital of the United States. Temporary capital moving from New York to Philadelphia. So be in Philadelphia for 10 years. And then moving to what we know as D.C. today, thereafter as the permanent capital. Washington had that act amended specifically to include Alexandria within the border of the District of Columbia. So Alexandria would be included within D.C., and it would be part of D.C. For about 47 years, officially from 1801 until 1847. Originally, when the Residence Act passed, the boundary of D.C., it wasn't going to go further past the Anacostia River. So to actually include Alexandria meant that Washington had to take somewhat of a risk, because by proposing basically proposing a new, kind of amending the act, it could have been overturned, or they could have then gone back to the debate about where do we actually want our nation's capital. So it was somewhat of a gamble, but it paid off. And so that is just showing that now the centrality of Alexandria in many ways, to Washington, and the fact that he would want this included. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that Alexandria by 1790 is a very thriving port city. And it's one of the larger exporters of what is now the dominant crop, wheat, in the United States. And he actually writes a letter to his old friend, George William Fairfax's wife, Sarah Carey, aka Sally Fairfax, who fans of Washington may know might have been his first crush going back years before. Historians have often talked about, Washington was in love with his best friend's wife. I mean, look, I'm not going to get into all that. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But he has a letter that he writes to her about the vibrancy of Alexandria, and seeing the roads that are now being paved with stone, and how it's turning into this thriving port city. One of the things, though, he mentions in the letter, this is really fun, is that, it could be a really great city if we can just avoid all the wars that are going on in Europe at the time, which then gets into the big political issue of the 1790s. One of the things that maybe there is a good book written about this, but I have a lot of book ideas in my head, but I would love to write about and dive deeper into how the wars in Europe really drove the politics of America in the 1790s. I mean, look, historians talk about it in the sense of they write books about Washington. That's included in there, but just a deep dive into, France basically being at war with all of Europe, and how that just drove such a deep political wedge in the country at the time. So it's interesting that Washington put that in there. So let me just pause
yeah,
there.
he was always trying to keep the United States out of European wars. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, it
I
is.
mean,
It is
it split the country, right? Jefferson,
100%.
Hamilton, and all that. Wow. Well, thank you, Tim. And that's. I mean, Mark and I knew this was going to be great because obviously the topic's great, and it's always good to have a public historian on because there's no problem with the public historian speaking. That's perfect. So many times we do podcasts
Especially one who's a tour guide.
and the person doesn't want to talk. But this has been great.
Yeah.
Talk about Alexandria too. Largest George Washington birthday parade is in Alexandria. I think I wrote this down. It's Valentine's Day this year, February 14th, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So before you take your significant other out for dinner, celebrate George Washington. Real quick before we jump off, talk about your tour company and where people can find out more information about your tours.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So Alexandria History Tours is pretty easy. AlexandriaHistoryTours.com. The tours, we run tours pretty much. I try to run them every day. I mean, we didn't have any tours going out today.
Yeah.
It's a lot of snow and ice, but I have done tours in the snow, though. Just typically not. 6 inches is usually,
Right.
gets kind of out of the. Most people don't sign up when there's 6 inches or more.
Sure.
So, but yeah, no, do tours year round. It's all guided walking tours. Alexandria is a very walkable city, so there's really not a lot of people, if they're doing a trip to DC, they might walk 7 miles plus on the at the National Mall, and then Alexandria is like a nice little reprieve because it's very walkable. And yeah, we run tours all the time, really love it. Got a good team that's now been kind of built up, a couple other guides. So if I'm not personally leading a tour, it's usually because I'm doing research, maybe I'm doing something trying to build up the social media. This book, I did a lot of research for the book. I mean, I got a young daughter, so so this book is a lot of like 4 a.m. trying to like write from 4 to 7.
Mark and I get that 100%. We have young kids too.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, like before my daughter starts like to get,
Hmm.
starts. So
Understood.
yeah, and then because then during the day, like, again, I'm trying to run the company. I'm trying to run tours, um, especially when we get to the spring and summer, try to do 3 to 4 tours a day. And um,
Cherry blossom season. I know.
that's
Crazy
right.
around here. Yep.
That's right. Yep. So, really love it. Just got a lot of, people give us great feedback. I mean, got over 300 5-star reviews on Google now. I mean,
It's great.
just as many I don't remember the total numbers, but TripAdvisor, Viator, people leave a lot of great reviews, and I think they just love it. And all my guides have a passion for history, and we all try to keep it, look, when people ask me questions, that's when the tour can run long because they get, next thing I know, I'm getting spun up on stuff. But try to keep it fun. Look, it's not. We try to keep it, interesting. We give some fun anecdotes, fun stories. Um, really want to get people interested and excited about history, excited about our founding fathers, excited about George Washington. I mean, the fact that we can go to all these places associated with him, and he's the father of our country. And it's just a pleasure. It's an honor to be doing this, to be promoting this history, and especially with the 250th coming up.
Right.
I love this country. I serve this country, and I want to see us go on for another 250 years. And for you have kids, I have kids, for our kids, and so it means a lot. This is kind of another fun way to serve, and many, by doing public education, it's great. So, yeah,
Well, that's great. And again, George Washington and Alexandria, a founding friendship with History Press. If you cannot make it to Old Town to see Tim's tour, grab the book for sure, or grab the book and come join a tour. Trust me, it's always great reading about these places and then going to go see these places because I do think it makes it such a more impactful understanding of the topic. Well, Tim, thanks again. Thanks for jumping on. I'm glad that
yeah,
you got a chance. We didn't lose power doing this today, and
yeah.
I appreciate everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks on our next Rev War Revelry. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.